Tonight that we had is basically we can't hear the panel out of the television, unfortunately. We can hear them out of the AM radio, otherwise known as a Windows computer, a PC over here. So welcome everyone to the TAP Team presentation for the Northeast Indiana Church Planting Initiative, led by our church planter and his wife, Nathan and Holly DeVaux. And so let's get Nathan recruited every person on this team and just did a phenomenal job. And man, you guys, I've been waiting to hear this story. I told you that already, but I cannot wait to hear what God has done in you, through you, in the work that you've done. And so we are really looking forward to hearing you tonight. So tonight, here's what we have. Our panel, I'm actually the only panel person here in person, but we have a panel of people on the screen over here, as you can see, and I'll try to look at the camera over there. So we have a couple cameras going on, one here with a live feed that is on YouTube, I do believe. But our panel here consists of Scott Wagner, our Director of Church Planting, Brianna Nicholas. Brianna has led several TAP teams herself. Some of you know her. I happen to know her a little bit. And then Mark Bowalda. Mark is the senior pastor at Pine Hills Kendallville. Some of you actually served on his TAP team. And then we have Chris Freeman around there somewhere. Chris, he blocked himself out. I'm kind of glad he did that. So, hey, Chris. And some of you served. Actually, this is what's really cool. Nathan and Holly served on Chris's TAP team, and here he is tonight. That is just the coolest thing I think that could happen. And so maybe some of you sitting here tonight. Just saying. And then Tom Bernardo. Tom is our Western guy out in Southern California. He takes care of church planting kind of west of the Mississippi, as well as pastoral development, leadership development, and he just does a ton of things. I don't know what all he does, but he does a great job. So that's our panel tonight. And then Neil Friesen, he is the executive pastor at Crossview. He's joining by Zoom tonight as well. So that's all the dignitaries. You guys, we just so appreciate you coming here under these unique circumstances. So I'm going to pray and then hand it over to Nathan, and we're going to hear from the team tonight. Father, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for this team that you put together and that you appointed, Father, during this very, very strange time in our history. Lord, I just pray tonight that as they present and as they share, that God will be inspired by how you're still at work. And so, Father, I just pray that you'll help us to listen tonight with open eyes, open ears, and open hearts, so that your will may be done, and the things that we're doing tonight will lead to people's lives being changed for eternity, for marriages being put back together, for broken people just being mended and put back together, that this is all a part of this. So, Lord, your will be done tonight. In your name we pray. Amen. Nathan.
Well, it's definitely exciting to be here. It's a little bit surreal, and it seems like just yesterday, I think almost everybody that's on the panel was part of our church planter assessment. And part of that process is to do a mock presentation like this, and this is a little bit different. This is the real deal. But what's interesting, and we'll get to this in a bit, part of that process for us as prospective church planters was to do some mock vision casting. And so part of the vision that we even cast and what we believe God was beginning to reveal to us then, we're presenting the same community tonight. So that's pretty cool. It's just been unbelievable in about a year and a half to see what God has done in that community and even in our hearts, and how he confirmed that through this TAP team. So we are so excited that our team is here with us, and they're going to be the ones that are giving this presentation tonight. And it's unbelievable just how well they've supported us here over this last 10 or 12 weeks, and for all of us going through this unique season. I mean, each one of us as an individual, as a family, has a decision to make. I mean, I can easily bail, and I think that that would even be acceptable under these circumstances. I got to take care of my family, my business, everything else, my mental health, but they all stayed locked in, and I really believe God honored over the last 10 to 12 weeks and how God has moved in that process. For us, what we really felt like we were trying to accomplish or trying to come to really came out of this. Yeah, I am pressing the down arrow. Oh, welcome. I'll have to check my computer. Maybe we have our second technical glitch.
This is part of the test to see how you do when things don't go exactly the way you thought they were going to happen.
Well, the first time that I preached at Crossview, they turned off the lights on me. I think it was Jimmy who's on my tag team and turned off the lights.
That was intentional. That was intentional.
There we go. We good now?
You're good.
Okay.
Your computer was trying to update.
Glitch averted. Michael, did you even download PowerPoint? So one of the verses that Jay shared with us in the TAP team training, John 15:8, this is to my Father's glory, that you would bear much fruit. So the question that we really presented to God is, where are you planting us, this specific group at this time, to make disciples and to bear much fruit? And I think one of the things that you'll hear tonight, and it was Holly and I's prayer through this process, is not that we would just come to a conclusion on a community, but that fruit would bear itself in the hearts of the people that are on this TAP team. And I think each of them will share just personally how they were touched, how God moved in their lives, not only to help them come to a decision on a community, but just some really neat and amazing things in how he spoke to us. So what we found, and really what the center of our presentation is going to be tonight, is around the community that we believe the Holy Spirit is leading us to plant a church. And that community is Southwest Fort Wayne. So we believe that when we ask God the question, where are you planting us to bear fruit, the answer that he brought to us was Southwest Fort Wayne. And even though we were in the midst of some unforeseen circumstances, and these guys will talk about how our process changed drastically, we really felt like the purpose of this team is to hear God's voice and that he would reveal this to us. And so whether that meant I'm out in the public face-to-face with people or I'm sitting in my living room on a couch, God can speak to me in either one of those places. And we really believe that he did through this process. So tonight they'll share kind of the black and white, the data, the systems that we use, how we made certain decisions, and just the data why we believe that this is a strong community. But each will share some personal stories as well. Some divine intervention, just some God really showing up in big ways. And so to start us off, before we really get into the black and white and dive into the process, I thought it would be helpful, because this was such a unique process, a unique team, and such a unique time, is to share more of the personal side of it. What was it like to be on a team in a pandemic? And what are some of the things that you saw God do among our team and even in your own lives? So to start us off and introduce us tonight will be Josh and Julie Chrismore.
Okay, so consecrating ourselves. So in our first TAP team meeting, we prayed to God and we prayed that he would break us. We really needed to be broken of any preconceived notions, any stereotypes of any of the communities that we're examining. So we really needed to, we just prayed and asked him to open our hearts and open our minds so that we could be clean vessels for him. And in our first meeting, we also, Joshua 3:5, Nathan read this. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow. So, we know it's ourselves that weren't doing the amazing things, but one thing that we know is that through this process and through prayer and just growing closer to God through this process, he has really given us a ringside seat to see what he's doing in the spiritual realm, and that was just an amazing thing to see. through hearing God's voice, man, just the way this season has been, it's been different. It's been really life-changing, just hearing God's voice. And I think what this season has really allowed us to do is be still and listen a lot more to God as well. I think, and you'll hear this as the team shares their stories too, we've heard God's voice through many different things, whether it was music, visions, dreams, his audible voice. One of the stories that really stuck out to me, one night, it was a few weeks before we wrapped up and voted, Nathan had brought up a story where he had talked to another guy named Josh, good name, and he asked him about the Southwest, and he said that the Southwest was spiritually dead. And that just really didn't sit well with me. I just felt really convicted about that, and I just prayed about that. And it just kind of continued. I just continued to think about it and continued to think about it and pray to God about it. And the day that we voted, I was probably still on the fence a little bit on, which way I would go, but I'm driving my car to work and I'm praying, and on the radio comes a song, and the lyrics are, I'm going to see a victory, I'm going to see a victory, I'm going to see a victory, because the battle belongs to you, Lord. And at that moment, I just knew that Southwest was going to be the place. No matter how hard it's going to be, with God on our side, the Southwest Fort Wayne is where this church plant's going to be, and he's going to see victory there. Unity of the Spirit. We all come from very many different backgrounds and circles of life, and it was really cool to have different people from different churches. And I think we just became a real cohesive group together right away in prayer and just caring for one another, and just being open and hearing what God has to say to us. And now we're going to turn it over to Julie. Make sure I got everything.
So, being on the TAP team during a pandemic, Jay had said earlier, we had to rewrite the book kind of thing for this. There are parallels between Paul's isolation through imprisonment and then our isolation through lockdown. It initially for him probably looked like a disruption in his attempts to advance the gospel, just as it looked initially like it was a disruption in our attempts to kind of isolate and locate our community. And I guess really the message there is that the gospel will shine regardless of circumstances. Paul was ultimately, shackled in chains willingly for Christ, just surrendering to the sovereignty of God. And so, just some of the, even as what Jay had said earlier with it would have been easy for Paul to just kind of throw up his hands and say, well, I'm in prison, ministry ends here. And he didn't. He, not only did he continue to make disciples who made disciples through the jailers, through other prisoners, he also wrote much of the New Testament. Our process, we could have easily just kind of said, oh, we should, either delay this or maybe we need to postpone this. And we didn't. I feel like if anything, it actually kind of spurred us on even more so. God stirred in each one of our hearts and called each one of us to be on this team for a reason, and it wasn't conditional. It wasn't, oh, if there's a pandemic, I'm going to give you an out. He didn't say that. He said, oh, you're going to be on this team, and this is the purpose of this team. So how did we do that? We definitely took advantage of technology and social media. There was so much Zoom, just all the Zoom. But Kate, one of our teammates, she actually did this. She had this beautiful list of interview questions, just like a template that she shared with each one of us, so that when we were engaging with others in the communities that we were researching, it was just a nice way to kind of be able to see what the spiritual health of each community was, just based off of those person-to-person interviews that we conducted. So that I thought was invaluable to this process. Also just utilizing Facebook, letting people know that, updates that were happening, reconnecting with old colleagues or friends. I feel like people were encouraged by the fact that we were still, having the process wasn't stopped or anything, and that encouraged us as well. So that was kind of cool too. Another thing that was really, really awesome, and just goes to show you that God will take any situation, whether, no matter how bad or uncomfortable it may seem, and He's going to use it for good. Because of the lockdown, pretty much all the churches are streaming services, and so we were able to visit so many more churches than what we would have been able to had the lockdown not have been in place. So that was also just really amazing. That also kind of just confirmed to us as well. There's a large group of people in our communities who either, they can't attend services in person on Sundays, and this has really kind of showed us that in order for us to continue to reach those communities, having some form of digital platform is going to be really important in the future, because we want to continue to reach them even after this is done. So just on a personal note, I had no idea what to expect going into this experience, and it was earth-shattering for me, this whole process. God broke me, for sure. But then, just my intimacy with Jesus is so much deeper than it was at the beginning of all this, and so I'm just so thankful to have been a part of this process.
So, we're gonna frame our conversation tonight, or our presentation, around the target analysis process, which is consideration, research, exploration, and confirmation. And it really looks nice and neat and streamlined on paper, but because of the situation we were in, we did a lot of adjusting and used a lot of creativity to move forward. But it was really pretty awesome to see God's hand in that and specific to that. So phase one is consideration, and Kyle and Josiah will talk about that in just a second, just to give you, if you're not familiar with what that is, an overview. It's basically, for us, it was the brainstorming process of possible communities that we would then go in and do a little deeper research on. And so on our first night together, actually, we had 18 communities that we started with, Southwest being just one of them. And then we, on the first night, narrowed that down to 10. And so Kyle and Josiah will talk about kind of how we narrowed that, the process that we used, or the steps that we took. And also just kind of how the Holy Spirit revealed to us through that day, but also going back to that information kind of on a regular basis to help guide us throughout the rest. So Kyle and Josiah, or whoever's going first. Yep.
All right, I'm Kyle, and I'm going to start with saturation. See, I got it down. Sorry, I've had the giggles all day long. I was locked up for 2 months, and I needed to get it out of my system. Apparently I'm not done yet, so saturation. So there's a few things that we started looking at when we were talking about saturation during the brainstorming stage, and then also specifically with regards to the southwest side of Fort Wayne. The first thing that we looked at, kind of an obvious thing, were there other churches already in the area? Fort Wayne, there's no shortage of churches. I think the question really became, what kinds of churches are there? What are they doing? Are they growing? Are they dying? What do those churches look like? And are we going to be planting a church that's similar to that? I mean, in fact, what we found was the fact that there were quite a few pretty small, denominational-based churches, which, I mean, no matter what area we looked at, and we would find this everywhere across the United States, you're going to have a United Methodist Church, a Catholic Church, and a Lutheran Church. So with that being said, they were in the area. We're not planning a Lutheran church or a Catholic church, so we didn't necessarily feel like that conflicted with us much. And based on just doing research of trying to find out information about them through websites, obviously this was impacted by being locked up. Looking at websites, Facebook pages, trying to watch their videos online, and some of them didn't even have that stuff. So that kind of says the situation that a lot of those churches are currently in, and probably speaks to why many of them are actually shrinking and losing their people. Now there were a couple big names in the Southwest specifically, and obviously they're all around Fort Wayne. In our target area, the Chapel, Sunrise, and Emmanuel Church were there. And I think there's going to be opportunities for everyone to kind of speak to different aspects that we looked at with those things. So I'll just give a brief explanation. What we considered in terms of saturation. The thing that we found was while these churches were big and they had the programs and that kind of stuff, there's always little holes or gaps or opportunities that maybe a much larger church wasn't filling quite as well as maybe a mid-sized church would be. So the fact that we did have big churches, it wasn't a no-go sign for us. It meant, okay, well, maybe there are still spiritual gaps that we need to try to figure out what can a new church in this area fill, and how can we meet the spiritual needs of the community that maybe these really large churches just are missing because they're either so big or they're overpopulated, or people are leaving those because they're seeking something more intimate. So those are the kinds of questions that led us to continue probing the area. The next category, church plants in the area. We really couldn't find anything that was significant, which I thought was a little bit interesting, that there was nothing of note, nothing that seemed new in the area. There were historically places that had been planted or maybe replanted, but I mean, the best we could find was something that was from 2005-ish range. So again, that, I wouldn't consider that a church plant anymore. If anything, that's just maybe a small kind of still growing, potentially small church, something like that. But it didn't match what we would consider to be a new church plant, like what we're going to be embarking upon. And the last thing, obviously, FEC presence. Now, I will say that, we're planning an FEC church. So obviously it came up, hey, should we be concerned about planting next door to an FEC church? On that side of it, I can tell you that we had nothing but 100% support the entire process. Everybody that Nathan talked to, all the feedback that we received as a team said, hey, if the right place to plant is a half mile down the road from an FEC church, then plant there. If that's where the Spirit is leading us to plant the church, then go there. So we did. I mean, we considered those areas. We considered areas right in the neighborhoods. As a matter of fact, our last couple areas, came down to places that were, or I guess just the last few areas, came down to places that were in the vicinity of FEC churches. So we didn't take them off the board just for that. It just so happens that the Spirit led us to the Southwest, where there is no FEC presence that we can find at all. The closest would be coming up to the northern side and the center of Fort Wayne. After saturation, the next thing is to look at compatibility. Really, I asked myself, as I was kind of thinking through how we did this process, I thought, well, what did we do to think about compatibility for Nathan? And I really boiled down to three questions. Who are we likely to reach? Do Nathan and Holly fit the area? And is there potential for growth? So the first section here, who are we likely to reach? And this also crosses over into who are we targeting? Because I think that part of listening to the Spirit is feeling a call to a specific people group in the community. So it's not just, we're going to plan this community and hopefully there's people there that need a church. We're going to go to a community because we feel like the Spirit is calling us to the people of that community because there's a need, a legitimate need. For that matter, we looked at, and there's a demographics portion, so I won't dive too deep into that. We looked at to see what kind of people are just in the Southwest vicinity. I mean, it's just loaded with young families, people that are unchurched, mainly because they're moving to the area. Southwest is growing tremendously. New neighborhoods all over the place. New neighborhoods, new growth, people moving to the area, all that's just combining just a swell of population of people who are going to need spiritual guidance. They're going to need a church to call home. Do Nathan and Holly fit the area? Understandably, when we started mentioning Southwest, the question was like, well, they live in the Southwest, so is that consideration? This was kind of like the FEC thing. Should we consider being near an FEC church just because we're planning FEC? We did the same thing with this question. We said, look, we're not going to mark a place off because it poses the question that they live there. As a matter of fact, as we went through this process, it became obvious that not only should we consider Southwest, but you will not find anybody better to plant in the Southwest than Nathan and Holly. You just won't. They're here, they're in the community, they know the people, they know the rhythms, they're integrated. I mean, it's such a good fit. And no wonder the Spirit led us there. Lastly, potential for growth. One of the neat things about Southwest side of Fort Wayne is its proximity. I think there's a joke that goes around that says you can get anywhere in Fort Wayne in 10 minutes. But Southwest side of Fort Wayne is like a hub of growth, but also shopping and industry and new housing places going up. So the potential for growth is obvious. I think that there's a lot of people there. But I think the interesting underlying thing was the actual spiritual growth. When we were interviewing people, the thing that we kept hearing was, we're looking for deeper, more meaningful, more impact. And so that led us to believe, look, this isn't just a population thing, this is really a spiritual growth thing. There is a need for a church to come in and plant and help draw people into that spiritual growth. So, I mean, it's just a double factor potential for growth. Just on a personal note, and then I'm going to hand it over to Josiah. I've been talking to Nathan about this church plant for over a year now at this point. And so what's funny is, at least a year ago, sitting in Mocha Lounge, I think I was joking with Nathan at the time, and I said something like, yeah, we're just, my wife and I were looking around at a house, and we were looking down in Southwest Fort Wayne, so that way we could plant a church with them and move out there. And that was kind of like an off-the-cuff, just, joke. We started the process, and after the first night, we had kind of narrowed it down, and once we started to see the picture, and Southwest popped up on the map, for me, and I mentioned this to Nathan without telling him the locations I had, I said, and I think it was after the first meeting, I said, I have 2 spots in my mind, and I feel like one of those 2 is it. Those are the places. And I never mentioned, and he, for that matter, never asked what I had been thinking. So on the second to last night that we met, probably 3 weeks ago, I spilled the beans to the rest of the team and said, look guys, I've been on the Southwest team because, after night 1, it was the 2 places. One of those places got knocked out about halfway through, and from that point on, I just felt like everything was pointing Southwest. It was just a pure, unfiltered answer. And then just watching the rest of the team sort of get on my page was so no, but it was really fantastic. I think, just to speak to that a little bit, it was really cool because not saying anything, but then not getting any pressure to hey, what do you think? That never happened. So for me, it was Southwest almost from day 1, and it just continued to be a stronger and stronger conviction throughout the whole process. So I will hand it over now to Josiah.
Hello, I'm Josiah Sill. Probably many of you don't know me because I am brand new to the area. My wife and I moved here about a year ago from Phoenix, and I'm currently at Pine Hills. And so anyway, this came up. There was the talk of, we're gonna do this church plant. Are you interested? And I leaned over to my wife. You think you're interested in that? She's like, I think I'm interested. So here we are. Here we are, which is interesting. So
You ever thought about planting a church?
I don't know. I never thought of it. So all right. So I'm going to have some overlap with Kyle as far as the information and some of the same topics, but so we're going to start with receptivity. What is the condition of the soil of the Southwest area? And so the first question was, is it hard soil? Is it difficult? And one of the things that was touched on was, when we talked about the larger churches in the area and how there might be slips through the cracks and all that. We're not seeing, and then also with Josh about what we heard from the other Josh, that the Southwest is dead. And we were getting as we researched, we were finding, it wasn't necessarily the Southwest was dead, it just wasn't growing anything new. But the wonderful thing is that the larger churches have now plowed the soil. And it's there. It's not this completely, we're not going into the Amazon trying to, teach people who've never heard about Jesus. This is not new information, and it's ready. People are seeking to know more, to go deeper, and which is really exciting, which is a really wonderful benefit to the Southwest area. And which then leads into, is it compatible? And I know Kyle had a whole thing about compatibility, but on just a different note, I have this subpoint for vision for the church. And really early on, I think even on the first meeting, and almost like every meeting I felt kind of bad, but I kept asking Nathan, so Nathan, what's your vision for the church? Like, I know that we're trying to find this area, but what is it that you're wanting? And as the weeks progressed, I could tell why he was not wanting to, he was holding his cards close, and a lot of it's because what his vision and what the Lord's put on his heart for the church is the Southwest, and it matches the Southwest almost. It does. It matches it perfectly. It just is, with young families, young professionals in the area, and but being also close to the downtown, which is the beautiful part of this crossover area, where you have this whole residential, this huge booming residential area, but then you drive 5 minutes and you're at Jefferson Point, you're driving another 5 minutes and you're actually hitting into the city, you're in the city of Fort Wayne. You could have so much collaboration in this area, which is, I know, something that was on Nathan's heart. And so that was a huge thing. It had nothing to do with being that they lived there. It was, I remember when I first met with Nathan at, what was it, Mocha Lounge, right? And I asked him, I was like, that's where I meet everybody. Yeah, a lot of Holy Spirit. Hey, it was all new to me. So, and that was one of the first things, like, he described to me the church. And so as I went into the TAP process, I was thinking, what are these areas going to look like? What are these areas that have young professionals, young families that are seeking to go deeper with the Lord? And as Kyle mentioned, I left the first meeting with pretty much 2 areas. In my head, I was like, well, it seems like it's probably these 2 areas. And I didn't know anything about the area, but other than where I live. And so anyway, that was a really cool thing. And then, is the soil fertile? And as I mentioned before, with the larger churches plowing, it is ready. And that was one of the reasons why we've really felt the Spirit spurring us on to not postpone because of COVID-19, but to press in, because it's time now. It's time now. And it's not, wait a couple years, wait till everything dies down and things get back to normal. It's time now. Oh, that's my phone with the timer. So then we go into proximity. And so when this was like, from the beginning, we had all the communities thrown up on the wall. Southwest was on there, and it became the elephant in the room, really, because it was like, well, we know Nathan and Holly live there, and Nathan and Holly were kind of playing their cards close, and like they weren't really trying to say either way if they wanted to go there. And honestly, I felt like you kept pushing it away. If anything, he was pushing the Southwest away because it seemed too easy. It seemed too easy that it would be like, yeah, in my backyard. It just seemed too easy. But it kept staying on our list. As we prayed, as we went out and researched, as we found all these places that, honestly, there were several places that we found that could have a church, that needed a church. But it wasn't the place where the Lord was leading us to plant the church that Nathan and Holly have on their heart. And one of those things that we were seeing as we were determining this was the benefits of planting locally. And it's and Kyle touched on this, but they're there. They're in the community. He knows his neighbors. How much easier is it going to be for him to say, hey, I'm starting a church. Why don't you come and check it out? As opposed to us going somewhere, nobody knows him from Adam, and we try to have people come, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. And Holly's a teacher. That's huge. I know you coach. All of those things play into this proximity of, it's not just that it was easy. And honestly, those were just things that, as it was like, hey, this is no longer about, this is just the easy road to take. Because honestly, we weren't at this conclusion until like 4 weeks ago. It was like, we were trying, I felt like, to not be in the Southwest, which goes into the last point, which is God breaking down prejudices. And, you know, and it was funny for me because I'm not from the area, and the only thing I'd ever read was I'd read a few reviews, like I'd read some stuff when we were getting ready to move here about how North Fort Wayne's new money and Southwest Fort Wayne's old money. Like that's all I ever knew, right? That's all I ever knew. But I didn't know what else to think about it. But it was really cool to see the Lord, like almost every week there'd be somebody new on the team saying, I think it should be Southwest. And I'm leaning towards Southwest. Or I ask somebody, and you'll hear more of these stories, I asked somebody who I thought was going to say, great for this one community, but they would be like, no, why are you planting a church? Why would you want to plant a church here? And then I would ask somebody about Southwest, like, that's great, we need one. And it was, all of a sudden, it was in spite of the prejudices and in spite of the trying to get away from Southwest, the Lord was just like, nope, it's right here. Just leading us along, just like a good shepherd. And anyway, it was just a real big blessing to see that, and I'm kind of over my time. So, yeah, there you go. If there's any questions, no, we're breaking the thing, but if there's any questions for this section, you can ask a question.
Yeah, so I want to allow our panel here, and there again, guys, it's going to come through this computer, and it's not going to be as loud, but so panelists, what questions do you have? I have a couple things written down here, but I want to let you guys fire away first. What comes to mind? What questions do you have for the team here? And yeah, so take it away.
I'll ask a question. And by the way, you guys, great job already.
Hey, can you tell us who you are? Hold on real quick here, and let me make sure that I can get you up here on the screen.
Yeah, my name is Jay Nicholas.
I'm not that good looking. I'm sorry.
This is Tom Bernardo. I was curious, Josiah, you mentioned a couple times that the larger churches have plowed the soil, and I appreciate hearing about, we really do spend a lot of time thinking about where has God already kind of allowed that to happen, where we can watch where the ground is receptive. I'm curious in what specific ways, or do you have specific ways that you feel like the soil was plowed by those churches? Is it plowed in ways that they're still not reaching those people, or what did you notice that made you say it that way?
So I'll come up here so everybody can hear me. So basically through our research, and a few other people will talk about this. To be honest, we kept on getting reports from people that were attending these churches that they were leaving because they weren't being able to go deeper with the relationship with the Lord. And those churches weren't doing anything bad, but it was, oh, this is great, but now what? And it kept just being surface. And so the ground was prepared for deeper growth, but those bigger churches weren't necessarily providing it for those people. And we were finding it across several different people that were interviewed that were across several walks of life, and then they were saying they were seeing it amongst all of their peers doing the same thing. And so that's what I would mean by the soil is plowed, that these churches aren't doing anything wrong, but it's just kind of surface level, and they're preparing it for deeper growth. Those churches aren't, either they're not providing the ministries for that, or they're just so big that those people that they just fall through the cracks. So it's just such a big net. So
one of the things that I would say is that one of the churches in the area, one of the newer churches actually, but it's probably been at least 15 years because they actually started out of the theater in Jefferson Point. And they're unashamedly seeker friendly and seek to be the church that is unlike the others. And so what you get in that is that once people connect with Jesus, a seeker friendly continues to kind of seek and bring in new people. But when they get to a spiritual maturity that's beyond that, then they're going, well, what's next? And I think that one of the things we found in this area, just from a size standpoint, is that there really weren't many churches that we found that were 300 to 500 people. It was either you were in a community of 100 people, or you have the Chapel, Sunrise, and Emmanuel, which are all three over 1,000 and probably 2,000 in a couple cases. So there was opportunities where people have grown, but they started at these churches when they weren't 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people, and they missed that more tight-knit community.
Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Someone else on the panel, what questions, any other questions that you guys have?
Scott, can you tell me a little bit about how you are viewing the, I've been hearing about going deeper and bringing, which tells me that you're talking about church people, but help me understand how you're looking at the unchurched people. And I haven't heard too much about going after the unchurched in that area. Who are they? Have you identified them? What do they look like? I know the landscape pretty well. I know there's a broad range of people in that area, so from a socioeconomic perspective. So, just if you don't mind,
And does
help
that,
us understand
yeah,
how
but-
the unchurched people.
and does that, I guess my question on that would be, well, does that fit better in your research phase, guys, that you're going to talk about, that you're going to get to? So are you okay with that, Scott, that they deal with that, okay? Anybody else on the panel before we move on? Okay? I want to applaud you guys. I want to tell you that, Josiah, what you pointed out about the churches plowing the ground, and people rake me over the coals over this, but I'm telling you, one of the best places to plant a church is under the shadow of a megachurch. Telling you, it is. I know, I've done it. It works. But for you guys to actually pick up on that and to see that is pretty amazing. Not too many of our tap teams really recognize that, and so I just I want to applaud you on that. That just the whole idea of the soil. How is the soil? Because if the premise, remember the premise, where is God at work? That's what we're looking for, where God is at work. So let's move on. Nathan, thank you guys. Great job.
So the next phase is research, and so here's where we got into more of the, at least what we intended to be, more of the data-driven set of information in terms of demographics and what is the community like. Obviously some of that comes through in consideration, and we're kind of going back and forth, and as we moved through research, we narrowed it from, we started off researching 10, so each family or individual on the team was assigned a community. We researched it for a week, held interviews, talked to people, drove around, prayed in specific spots, and after that first time we got back together, we narrowed it from 10 down to 4. From some of the stuff in the consideration phase, but also what we found in the research as well. And so some of this, the personal interviews and the personal experiences, I think we'll touch on, even just some of the question of, I think for me, when we talk about unchurched people, it looks a lot different, I think, going into this next generation, because this is the first generation that's coming up now that wasn't raised in the church in America. But I think that you also have people who, it's almost like they're churched by association. If you live in a nice community, or if your family sort of goes to church or pops in, a couple times, are you considered churched or unchurched? And I think even just some of my own personal story and experiences, I was in the church from the day that I was born, but I didn't have a vibrant relationship with Christ. I had gone through the motions. And so we may not call that person unchurched, but I think we could say that they're unreached in terms of actually receiving Christ, being filled with the Holy Spirit, and leading a life for Him. And so we started to hear some of that in some of the research that will come through in our personal interviews. So Tom, Jimmy, and Kate will share, and Tom will start us off.
I'm Tom Lodger, and I've been a member of Pine Hills for about 19 years now. So I had the privilege of serving on the Kendallville tap team, so this is kind of my second time around. much different dynamics, obviously mixing 3 different congregations together. I didn't know any of these folks here. I was just prompted when Nathan and Holly got up at Pine Hills back in, I think it was February, and said they were going to plant a church, and they were putting together a tap team, and I felt prompted by the good Lord above that I needed to be on that team. So I knew a little bit what to expect as far as the process and the tap process, and met with Jay during that process. So really, it was an enjoyable experience, and I think it's really cool how God put each individual and each individual family with this team. As the process went on, I could just kind of view myself. You know, each person had a unique expertise and a unique experience, whether it be where they lived, or they recently moved here, or where they work. And you know, that became clear to me that each person was picked out by God for a reason. So I think that's cool, and that definitely points us in the direction. I had the privilege of looking at the geographic area. I don't know if that's a privilege or not, but actually, I never really told anyone this, but one of my hobbies growing up was to look at maps and atlas. I still have a big atlas, so I do enjoy maps. But if you're looking at the geographic area that we're focusing on here, obviously to the north you've got the Bass Road area, and then to the south down to the lower Huntington Road area, going west all the way to the county line. And then the east side would be Ardmore, north-south, and then of course the Jefferson or West Jefferson or US 24 kind of going down that angled area. And we'll share a little bit more about the population of that particular area. But this is definitely a growing area. I actually worked in the field of construction, and we're a building supply distributor. We just supply the material, and after a few weeks when we were going through the process, and I actually had this area to do some more research, and I went back to work that next morning, and it just started popping in my mind, all the different housing developments that are just blowing up out in this area. So if you look at this list, I'm not going to read them all. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. But if you drive down, the one that I see the most when I started typing this was West Hamilton. So if you go from West Hamilton, start down the southern part, around, I think it's Boyd Center. If you go north, all the way up to Bass Road, this side, this side, this side, you're seeing new houses being built. And you know, I think there's close to 20 different, I listed 20 different housing additions that are new just in the last couple of years, and they're continuing to at this point in time, even though the economy's obviously changed in the last couple of months. It's still going on. And we also have a very large apartment complex going up right next to the Coventry shopping area, right there adjacent to 469. So going along with what I believe Kyle mentioned and Josiah mentioned too, with respect to people and where they're at and they're new, I think that solidifies to us that the ground definitely is fertile. So before we get to didn't mean to go too far there, but I guess last minute to share, you know, with going along with pinpointing us to this particular area. I haven't really admitted to the group yet, but from the beginning, I felt like this was the area that God was leading us to. And a few weeks into our process, God had me promptly share in one of our Zoom meetings. I remember meeting with Roger Andrews when he was pastor of Pine Hills. And he obviously has planted churches in the past in Ohio and I forget what other state. But anyway, one of the things that Roger mentioned to me, and in those conversations, that's always kind of intrigued me by church planting. I never grew up in the church, but was never really familiar with that. And when Roger mentioned that to me personally, I just felt like that was prompting me to maybe someday God was going to lead me into that particular area. But the thing that became clear to me through Nathan and Holly, when I first met with him, knowing that they live in that area, and I shared this with the group that night, was Roger said when they moved to Fort Wayne, it was difficult for him and his wife to feel like they could really connect. in Fort Wayne, as opposed to where they were at, I believe it was in Cleveland area. Because he said, my kids were in school, my son was playing football in the high school. That was our relationships. That was where, you know, we mingled. That's the people we ran into at the ball games and the bleachers, you know, watching our kids at the school events. And right then, Holly and Nathan popped in my mind. They're in Southwest. Holly's teaching in Homestead district. And even though I'm in Northwest Allen, and if you know the significance of that, Carroll and Homestead, and I have kids that play sports and involved in the school, they're big rivals. So I had nothing in it. Why would we plant a church in an area that I'm a rival against? But it became clear to me that, you know, they've already built relationships there, and I felt, you know, from the pretty early stages that it was obvious that God was going to lead us to this area. So as everybody kind of, I guess, jumped on board along the way, it was kind of unique and intriguing how God moved with this team. So.
My name is Jimmy DeArmond. I'm with Crossview. I've been there for several years, and I might be one of the first person to stand up here. You know, Josiah talked about the elephant in the room, and about 3 or 4 weeks into this process, I started to feel like it was my mission to set these people straight. That the Southwest was not where we needed to go. That's just too easy. I mean, that just seemed way too easy. That's where he lives. That's where they want it. You know, I thought, like, this is a conspiracy. Like, why are we even doing this? So I'll share some stories along the way. But the topic I need to talk about are these amazing, mind-blowing, church-planting great numbers, right? Not really. I mean, you can never tell by numbers where a great place to plant a church is. You just got to look at the people that are there, how are they being served, what needs are met. But we did look at this area and say, yes, there's some great growth, there's some great population. The households, husband and wife, are about 65% of the households have 1 or more children. You know, and you look at housing units of 1,600, probably around 10% of that or more is just within the last 5 to 10 years. So it's just been a very growing area. And the median age is 39, which, if you look at Nathan and Holly, that's kind of the demographics we were going for. It's kind of the younger couple with kids. They're going to be involved in sports and the kind of things that Nathan is really, you know, he kind of takes that to heart. So that worked out really well. So on a personal note, like I said, I was kind of, I don't know, I was struggling with this the whole time. And as we narrowed it down to these 2 communities near the end, it was very interesting to me. My in-laws actually live in one of the communities we narrowed it down to. So I said, great, I'll talk to them about, you know, what's the need of that community, plant a church there. And I was shocked for them to tell me that they don't need any more churches, was their response, you know. What we need is we just need people to go to the churches that are already there. We don't need any new churches. We don't need to serve any new needs. And that just really, I don't know, it struck me. And then consequently, at the same time, I happened to be looking to buy a different car. And out of all the cars I looked at in all the areas, I ended up buying from a young couple that lives, you know, right near Jefferson Point. And as we were doing the deal and talking, you know, it was very pleasant. I tried to be nice in the dealings and everything. There were some issues, but they started talking about, you know, that it was great working with you and, you know, really nice or whatever. And so we started talking about churches, and come to find out, this couple has lived in Southwest about a year. They've attended these churches that we've talked about, the chapel and stuff. They've attended these larger churches, and they said they just couldn't feel plugged in. Like they felt like there was some good learning there and good scripture, but they just felt like they couldn't find a home, was really what they said. So just those 2 things with my in-laws and then running into them and talking, that just really turned my opinion about where this church needs to be. So.
I'm going to talk a little bit more about the cultural and spiritual climate based on some of the personal interviews that we did. So I interviewed about 10 individuals, different walks of life, who either live or work or grew up in the Southwest area. And I just wanted to get a gauge for what are the needs of that community, what's the community culture like. So as I went on continued to do these interviews, a lot of the residents compared to the Southwest like a country club or a gated community. And I was like, ew. That's like not great, that does not appeal to me at all. But I started thinking about this idea. I asked them to elaborate, what do you mean by that? How is a community like a country club? So they talked about these ideas of it just promoting conformity. There's a lot of pride in their neighborhood, pride in their schools, and just this insider mentality. So I just started to think more about how Nathan and Holly, as Chris and Kyle and everyone has said, how they have relational equity there, how a parachute planter jumping into that area would have a really hard time because of the culture and them having this insider mentality. So someone from their community that they know, that they trust, definitely has a leg up in that area. So that's one factor we considered. Also just getting a gauge for more of the culture in that area. A lot of the responses revolved around worldly success and wealth, this idea of image or reputation, and just comforts of life. I mean, we looked at the demographics. It's just a snapshot, and I understand there's a lot of diversity in the Southwest, but a lot of them are living pretty comfortable lives in terms of financial stability. And so it's just interesting as we discussed that as a TAP team, we started to realize that with this pandemic, a lot of their core values are being shaken. A lot of people are out of a job, out of income, and a lot of these comforts are being stripped away. And so what a prime time for the Holy Spirit to move. So we just got excited about that, and that continued to spur us on. And then just diving a little bit deeper into the spiritual health of that community, Josh mentioned before that they described it as spiritually dead, or some said spiritually sleepy. And so I started going deeper, well, what are the needs there in that community? What are you looking for? So some specific answers that continued to come up in those interviews over and over was just a desire to be in a church that is spirit-driven. They want to have a closer relationship with the Holy Spirit, to learn how to hear His voice and follow Him, which I think is beautiful. Again, looking for something smaller, more mid-sized, where they can really experience authentic community, where they feel like they are known, where they belong, where they are valued and missed when they're gone. And this idea of younger leadership, a lot of the responses that I got were talking about how the millennials and so like 20s and 30s age group is really becoming more of an unreached people group, I guess you could say, in that area. A lot of them are migrating out of those larger churches, and part of that is just like, I mean, I'm a millennial, so I guess I can say this, but it kind of can be like anti-establishment in a lot of ways some of the older generations have. And so a lot of these programs and larger establishments, they're just kind of turned off to. So that continued to come up, just a need for younger leadership to reach that age group. And again, a lot of people said this deeper intimacy with Jesus, they're craving something more, something deeper, even if they don't exactly know what that is or what that looks like. And then again, just there, I think, I don't remember who mentioned it, it might have been Kyle, just that there have been no church plants in the last 10, 15 years. And so, and a lot of the churches, the larger churches that are there, have more of an attractional model, and they're not really talking about planting any churches anytime soon. That's not really their focus of their ministry. So we need churches in that area that have that mindset of disciples making disciples, and churches planting churches and advancing the kingdom in that way.
Okay, to our panel here, can we do the questions, or
Yep.
you?
Yeah, nope, that's
Okay,
it.
sorry.
Questions based on what we just shared.
Yeah, questions, and can you address Scott's question from the previous phase when he's asking about the unchurched? So can you give us, did you come up with any type of percentage in terms of when you were looking at the demographics of what percentage of the population is attending church and what percentage is not attending church? Did you do anything along those lines?
I don't know how you would do that, and because I think a lot of people, because of the Fort Wayne, you can get from one side to the other in 10 minutes. We know in some of our churches, we have people who drive across. I mean, I don't know how you can't just take the population number there, divided by the churches there, and find a number, because they can go everywhere. I do think being in close proximity to southwest downtown Fort Wayne, that there are probably a lot of unchurched people in that area. I mean,
I think one of the things that makes it difficult is, again, talking about, from a personal context, we can talk about Holly's experience in Woodside, my experience on the wrestling team. If I were to poll, and I did this at the beginning of the year, I sat with my team and I said, what's important to you? And maybe 1 out of every 5 mentioned a relationship with Christ or church or God or anything to be religious. If I poll my neighbors and know just we've lived there, I can see their weekly habits and what are they doing on Sundays. There's 3 out of maybe 15 houses that I would say from our observation are engaged. And I think that that's where you have the idea of maybe a more nominal, I go when it's convenient or when things get tough or around the holidays. Even if you look at a church that has a big presence from one of the traditional denominations, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, if you were to look at a number of how many people belong to that parish, it's near 10,000. So do we count that there are 10,000 people who are churched? Or do we somehow get into that number and go, well, they're churched 2 weekends out of 52? And so it is harder to segment it apart. But one of the things I think that attracts us to this area, if you look at Fort Wayne as a whole, Fort Wayne and the surrounding area, right now the population sits around 750,000 people, with a stated goal from political leaders in the economy, that we want to be at 1 million by 2030. It was 2020, we didn't get there, so now we're saying it's 2030. When you move to this area, you primarily look in 2 places, northwest or southwest. And so there's an influx of not only people who are living there, but also doing business there. And so for us, where God has connected us, where we've been in business, where we work, where we live, we're connected to the next generation. So I think a lot for us and for our heart is to connect with these 20-somethings, young professionals still figuring out life and aren't connected to a church. And what our experience has been, whether it be through the interviews that Kate has done or communities that we're involved in on that side of town, is that for somebody like that who's new, who's single, to walk into an area that is just a traditional established church is a little bit overwhelming. And so I think that there's an opportunity there for us to engage them in community. And some other people will talk about, just what does it look like to be, and we talked about it there. If the idea of the community is country club, comfort, we've got it all together, keep up with the Joneses. What we have, and this came from an interview with a couple at City Church. A lady sat down with a friend from church, a church they were trying to get connected to, and she said, I just don't feel like I can be myself. Like, is anybody messy? And this lady honestly responded to her, I think we have some messy people in our church. And so it's hard to get beyond some of the polish and the shine. And just the way that God has wired us and our vision for the church, that's not really how we operate. And I think the team will talk about that, because I'm not going to talk about
So let me go back to the panel and ask the panel then, what questions do you guys have about the research phase?
I'll jump in with a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I've also got Space Jam playing in the background with my kids, so turn them up right. So, question would be, And the reason why I asked is one of the things that we discovered early on is that the church, every church will generally reflect the average age of that lead pastor within about a 10-year span on either side. And we've definitely seen that at City Church. I don't know if that's true for every church, but just curious what the average age of those pastors are of those thriving churches. I don't know if you have any information on that or not.
Hey, thanks for the softball, Chris. So, and even when we talk about prime planting season, we feel like there is a changing of the guard, so to speak. And one of the pastors at one of the staple churches out there has announced his retirement. There's a search committee. So I identified 28 churches roughly in the zip codes in the area. Of those 28 churches, now some of this is just eyeball tests and looking at their pictures online. I identified one that I could safely say was under the age of 40. You know, in a community where it's just thriving with young families. And so I don't know what the average age would be, but it's got to be in the 50s if only one of those people is under the age of 40. And I think even if you were to look at just like...
We're done.
I didn't say that they were old, I just said they were, I just stated a number. You may a couple of the churches, one started a Saturday night service, and you can just tell from graphics they use, how they resource things. The idea is we want to attract young families. Another church just for the first time, made a hire of a young adult pastor. So they recognize the need, and I think they're trying to fit it in other ways within their current system. But we're still finding that there are families who are graphic.
Other questions from the panel? Research phase. Okay.
Opportunity for questions from us as well too.
Yes.
I don't necessarily have one, but I'm just thinking, especially if I'm a Crossview elder who's going to eventually make that final call, I just need to know, like, there's freedom to ask questions from us too as well, not just the panel, right? No offense, panel, love you guys, mostly. So just making sure. Okay.
Be more specific.
Is that for a later time? You're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So
That's for a later time.
yeah, just to introduce the next phase is the exploration phase. And for us, this looked very different because I think it was actually the same week that we were getting ready to go into the exploration phase is when we were put on stay-at-home orders. So we definitely had to get creative. And I think as everybody has been kind of saying, probably a little bit shockingly to us, but also at the same time kind of spurred us forward and wanting to know more and do more. God was moving big time in the stay-at-home situation. Like even weekly on Zoom. But specific to the actual exploration and kind of talking about what that normally would be, if you're not familiar, what that normally would be is finding times to go out into the communities, be in parks, sit down with people in coffee shops, do all the things that basically were taken off the table for us. So we did that in other ways, which is also how it kind of overlapped and went back into exploration, I guess, technically, research, because we were doing a lot of that through Zoom or through phone calls or through Facebook messaging or interviews and things like that. But Brian and Megan and then Dave and Emily are going to share some of what they found, and even in all of this, we were able to have amazing conversations, which was, I just think really awesome, and that God provided that for us. So I'll tell you about that.
All right, hello, I'm Brian White. This is my wife, Megan White, and we attend Crossview Church, and Megan is the worship director at Crossview. But just so you know who we are, I'll follow her outline because I'm more of a free flow guy, so I'll follow her outline and then get the personal stuff in there. So, as they said, This was a little different. And so our observations are more about the process, I think, than it was about the community. There'll be observations about the community through the other two, but it was our first time on a tap team.
Never done this before.
Doing anything like this, and obviously being in a pandemic and a quarantine made it different, especially in the phase that we're going to talk about. But through the whole process, I can say confidently that it was prayer and spirit led. I've never prayed so much in my life. And just coming to me naturally, and through my wife going, before we encounter this meeting, before we encounter this community, before we encounter this research, let's pray that God takes the flesh out of the way and that He allows the Spirit to move so that we don't let our prejudices take control of anything. So with that, we started into the research, and I observed that it was all very genuine. We got some nice natural encounters when we first were still able to meet, and we went out to explore our first assigned community and just had great things, just trying to find a map and going to 4 different places just to try to find a map so we could do it. And just that first general conversations of someone in a used, like, well, let's try the used bookstore. And why are you looking for a map? Well, because we're on a team to help find the place to plant a church. That's awesome. And it wasn't the person you think would say, that's awesome. And so a lot of good in those things. We dove into research, prayer, and we set out to have the people lead us to the people He wanted us to talk to. And I think in this time, I accepted more encounters with people than I ever have, and some of it was during a pandemic. So some of them were Zoom calls, but even before the pandemic full hit, and I'm just going to kind of focus in on this person because I think she led so much in this conversation to solidify this area that it's important. We met with her to discuss refinancing a house, and she was an old high school friend, and I did know that she was on fire with Christ right now. I could just tell from her social media presence that she was. So part of it is like, I want to talk to her anyways, plus we want to discuss this. And we met up and talked, and God gave us that arranged conversation, and it was awesome. The conversation was awesome, but it wasn't really about church planting. But we did discuss our faith and different things, and it was great. And then it wasn't until we had our meeting where Kate had her questions that I was like, this list was made. I mean, we went through what the people Kate interviewed and was like, man, we're seeing a pattern here. But it feels like these questions were made for this person because she's an active businesswoman, a mother, a wife, a believer, and she goes to a large church in the Southwest, and she's tied into that church. She's not being lost. She has gotten deep roots. And so I think that's important to say that no one's saying that the churches here aren't reaching some people deeply. They absolutely are. It just might be a little harder for some than others.
I think for her especially, she even mentioned that she had tried that church for a little bit in the past and then left because she couldn't get connected there. And then she went back and finally she dove in and she purposefully had to really, really try to get connected. But and she, in that search, in that time in between, had visited a lot of the other churches in that area. So she was able to give us insight into what some of those other places looked like. And that gave us a better insight as to what maybe needs to be brought there. And I think we can both agree, and I think we've all agreed that these guys are an incredible fit for that area. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but.
We basically, in Kate's questions, we got to ask her one, and then we sat and listened, and she answered every single question and we asked the one. So it kind of was tough to take notes, but some of the highlights, like Megan said, some things that stuck out to me. She is now tied into the fact, especially in women's ministry, where she goes on a woman's retreat, woman's walk. She led it the last time she went, And she said still to this day there are people who she knows are deep believers, but because of their outward appearance, it's still tough to go, I can let loose to this person. Because she had those same prejudices, and there is, you go to some of the churches out here, you don't find a lot of jeans and t-shirts. I mean, they're dressed in their Sunday best, and that's nothing wrong with that. But that can be intimidating to some people. And so, but she just, knowing that she loves her church, when we asked her, do you think there's a need for a church? She said yes. I mean, it just was like, yes. And in her conversation, it came younger leadership was huge. She said she knows people get missed because it's sometimes, now someone who's been pastoring for a long time can reach different age groups, but not always. And so some people get missed that way. She was that, she said yes, and I didn't think so. And so I was like, oh.
Surprising.
It was surprising. So we really, she agreed that there was a need for younger pastor, for smaller community, and for God, truth, spirit-centered preaching. And I'm going to say, I left my phone, I'm going to grab it real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to say, you talk about prayer.
Okay, I'll talk about prayer. So, the last one that I want to talk about was prayer, and this whole thing was bathed in prayer. Like he said, I don't know that we've ever prayed as much as we have. I don't know that this is the most we've grown quickly, and it's been awesome. I think that this quarantine has been an opportunity for us to just focus on the Lord, focus on praying for this in particular, to have that time to go and we did, like I think somebody else mentioned, got to see other churches online, and that was really cool. And I also think that this whole thing is causing a hunger for people. It's just stirring in them. And I think that the timing of this, I see God's hand in it, and it is perfect because people are searching. And I'm so excited. So, but yeah, it is bathed in prayer. I know the last week we all fasted and prayed together. I know for me, I was torn. I was not one of them on the side of Southwest at the get-go. I kept going back and forth between our second chosen area. And I still see a need there, but I went and drove around that week, and I prayed through that community. And God made it very apparent to me that yes, there is a need there for the churches to be more active, but it's not Nathan and Holly. It's not where they should be. So yeah, it was really incredible, and just that sense of, nope, this is not the area for them. And that was really comforting and really exciting. Nathan and Holly, and I wrote this because I think it's really important, but or do you want me to close with that?
No.
Okay. But I really feel like Nathan and Holly's ability to be open and honest and authentic, and with Holly's gentle, humble, she's got power behind it though, that's just amazing. And they are so on fire for the Lord that they can penetrate through some of the spiritual deadness, I guess, or sleepiness. I feel like that God is going to use that in such awesome ways. So
we turned from the area to now what you already decided was that he was going to be a great church planter, and now we're reconfirming that. But that's just how, I don't know, that's how God's leading me to feel. I think the area is so obvious that nothing more needs to be said about it, and that we've enjoyed the experience. I guess the one thing that I know for sure is that it was never mentioned through this whole thing about when Nate went through the initial process about it being in that community. He never mentioned it. And when Kyle, I think, kind of knew, our last, I'd say 3 or 4 Zoom meetings, Kyle didn't say a word. He made me listen, but didn't say a word, and I thought, well, something weird's going on. And I think it was because he knew he couldn't keep his prejudice out. And so I love that, because I can be a skeptic, and I know that there's no wool was pulled over our eyes. It's God who's saying to go here. I'm going to read this because I think it's important. My wife might not think so, but I'm going to. So the woman that I don't want to embarrass anyone or cry or anything, but the woman who I knew that Nathan was preaching that week, and so there are a couple people who, through Facebook things, one, we met a gentleman who is now tied into a church. We used Facebook during a Zoom call. I just said, what church do you go to? And the very first response was a guy who said, I am a believer, I don't go to church. I've never gone to church. Well, he goes to church now because he's watched Crossview for 4 weeks in a row.
It's been awesome.
And unprompted the last couple weeks. It's just like, boom, when you see him pop up, you're like, wow. The other is our friend who is tied into a Southwest church, and she's not leaving her church. She's very tied in. But I said, hey, I really think, I know Nathan's preaching this week, and I feel like you'll have a connection. And so she, at the end of Sunday, late, texted me back and said, I know it's late, but I just finished the message from today. I love Nathan's approach. Calm but powerful, I am guilty. I've been easily distracted during this time at home, not focusing on him, capitalize him. I needed to hear this today. God used you to nudge me to listen, and he spoke to me through this message. Thank you. I knew I had to listen. Satan tried to distract me today over and over again, but I wasn't going to let him win. Not today. It just motivated me more to continue to push play. I'm not sure where he is sending me, but I am listening. Interesting enough that the phrase he gave me this year was live with his purpose. There's no doubt in my mind that God has had us meet over coffee for a reason, and I don't think it was for mortgage refinance like we originally thought. That's one thing I love about my job, flexibility for divine appointments. And I guess it's just her genuineness, her fire for God it's like, it matches what I've seen with this group. And so I thought it was
Cool.
important.
Yep.
that-
Sorry, we went over.
David and Emily.
All right, so we talked about how our process looked a little different than normal during the observation phase that we're talking about right now. We would have been in the community usually, and those things all got shut down to us. They were not an option right as we entered that phase. So we got creative, and a lot of our Zoom meetings, or our meetings were on Zoom instead of in parks and in the community, and we ended up hashing out a lot of our own personal biases and prejudices. I'm one that went in saying, absolutely not Southwest. I personal prejudice against the Southwest, I'll admit it. And God has used this process to break me and show me how wrong I am. These meetings we would go into, and 1 week we're talking about all the benefits of one community versus the other, and the next week we're, this is all the benefits, this is why we should go with this community, and fairly consistently, I would say, I would go in arguing against Southwest in my head, because I wasn't always the most vocal on the meetings, but then leave it and just be like, oh, it's probably Southwest. Doggone it, God, what are you doing? But I think one of the things that really confirmed it to me has actually just been in the last few weeks, the stories of the rich young ruler, and he went away sad because he wasn't willing to let go of his money. And how often we say, oh, it's a sin to hold on to your money or to be rich. But he was unreached, and God didn't love him any less. And we're still called to reach out to those people who are living very comfortably, who have the security that, we often overlook and say, oh, we need to go help the needy, the physically needy people. And God loves everybody. We need to be willing to get through those prejudices, through those biases that we have personally, so that we can be real with people and get past those masks that they are holding up. Which is very prevalent in the Southwest community, but Nate and Holly, we've said over and over again, have a unique way of getting through that, and they're already established and in that community and have the ability to really reach these people.
One of the biases that we had been expressed early on was that since they're in the community, it was just a good fit. And we wanted to look at all of our biases and prejudices and say, is this really what God is calling us to, or is it just our own personal feelings for it? I did not have the biases that it was a good fit for them to be in Southwest, because I knew them from City Church and from Crossview. Okay, so I knew they were willing to go where God called them. The story of the young ruler, he went away sad because he wasn't willing to give up what he had. Okay, it wasn't that his wealth got in the way; it was that he wasn't willing to be obedient to what Jesus had for him. And it's not that Jesus is calling people to be without. The people who were obedient to Jesus when he said, throw your net over the other side of them, they were blessed so richly through that obedience. The young ruler, we can only imagine the young rich man who walked away and did not listen to what Jesus said. We can only imagine the rich life that he could have lived. Instead, he held on to what he had and wasn't willing to give it up. I know that Holly and Nathan were willing to give up to follow what Jesus had for them. And through this process, we were able to discern that there were certain biases that we came in with, but it really is that God is calling this church plant to that area, the Southwest.
Just to touch on one last thing as it relates to exploration is that, under normal circumstances, I don't know that we have the opportunity to do the internal exploration. It was obviously required in this endeavor. And if God had determined long ago that it was Southwest, and it wasn't necessarily that community needed to be revealed, but that in each of our hearts, that there were things that we were holding on to personally that needed to get out of the way so that His will would be done. And even in that, though, it's not like we all just sat on our hands and just prayed and we spent our time in our prayer closet. Josh talked to a friend, so the last two communities were Southwest and 05 PFW area. I talked to Chris that week, and he shared some stuff that was happening in the 05 that a church is relocating that already has a strong presence, and so it'll basically be like a replant. And Josh talked to a buddy who lives in the Forest Park area, and he said 3 pastors live on my street. And for Josh being on the fence and then having that conversation with that guy who lives on that street with 3 pastors, he now had an openness to where when he's praying and going, well, it's spiritually dead, and he's driving to work, which he didn't mention, he works on the southwest side of town in Roanoke, God was able to speak to him in a new way because of the conversation that he had with his friend who lives in the other area we were considering, and there's 3 pastors who live there. Jimmy happens to talk to people who live on the southwest side, and then there was even just, and were you gonna talk about like the moment, or? And so it's for us, and you're leading a group in 3 different churches. You don't necessarily know where people land, theologically or whatever. On does God speak, and how does the Holy Spirit act, and all of this. And so Holly and I are leading and saying we really believe I can't go in the community, God. You're going to have to tell me from my couch. And so we're telling our team and believing, God speaks. And He spoke to us. And so, one night, Holly had a dream. And again, I don't know where you guys are on this. And honestly, it's a brand new experience for us. So I don't even know how to explain it to you, and I don't understand it. Holly's not sure if she was still sleeping or awake, but as close to the audible voice of God as she's experienced in our life. He said, the time is right, the place is right, start now. And so for us and everything else that was happening, we just felt that was confirmation that to be in a community where you can hit the ground running right away, not to move and try and start and build relationships that I've built in your life over the last 6 years. And so that was big for us. And when she shared that, do I have permission to share? Okay. Kay said, well, okay, if we're talking about dreams, then I guess Holy Spirit just gave me a green light. A lady that she's friends with, was roommates with before she got married here recently, back before this process started, back before Kate even knew Nathan before Mike had shared his vision of planting 10 churches in 10 years. She woke up one night and she shared with Kate, she's like, man, I just had this really vivid dream, and I don't know what it's about, but I was with my parents who live in Chestnut Hills, which is off of Illinois in the 46814. Yeah, when you each have one, it's the 14. And we were going around our neighborhood and we were telling people about this church plant. And so for me, that sealed the deal, because we had believed and we feel like God had moved in a lot of different ways, but even just so much of what Holly and I have talked about is like, look, I can run a number and look up a percentage of what the data is going to tell me the unchurched people are in my neighborhood, but I can tell you that they're not reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so much of what I've talked about is, what do the unreached people look like? It looks like the people that we're living next door to. And to start a church and to get people to realize that we are the hands and feet of Jesus, and all you have to do is go and knock on your neighbor's door and just engage them and show them love, and that is all around us in the Southwest community. And so for her to talk about a neighborhood approach that Holly and I have discussed so many times, and in such a specific way, I don't think, as they said, that we really showed our hand in this process, but I was so close in that moment to just saying, okay, we're done. Like, we don't need to go any further. This is it. We can throw it in. But it was so interesting and so neat for us. The fourth phase is confirmation. And for Holly and I, you can join me up here. It was the elephant in the room. When I first sat down with Mike back in August of 2018, we talked about Southwest. We went through the planter assessment in September of 2018. We talked about Southwest. Dave Walters, who was at Pine Hills, used to be a Southwest guy, and his friends and neighbors, why isn't there a church like Pine Hills Southwest? Pastor Chris, people on his prayer team, saying things about Roanoke and different things in the Southwest. All that God's done in our lives over the span of the last 6 years we've lived there, and even more specifically over the last 1 or 2 years, we believed like this is the place. And so it was difficult for us to not show that in the process. And there was so much that was happening behind the scenes outside of the TAP process that we just didn't even bring to the table. It was difficult. And so, you're looking at 4 weeks ago, and this group's still split 50-50. I'm going, okay, God, like, I thought you were telling me this is the place. So is it you that's speaking to me? What's going on here? And just having those conversations and going, okay, if this is the place, then God's going to do it. And each week, one more person confesses prejudice and bias and how they didn't want to go there. And says, this is the place, and one by one. And so the confirmation, what that really looks like, generic definition, it's sensing from your team, from the Holy Spirit, when you go, okay, it's clear that there's a sign pointing to a specific community. And so we felt like we were moving in that direction, so we kind of set a stake in the ground and said, here's our goal for next week. We're going to come together as a group, and we're seeking confirmation. So I touched base that week with everybody on the team just to process with them, see what questions they had, what were they wrestling with, and just seeing if what we sensed was really happening in their hearts. And they began to share those stories. They began to share those divine encounters. And so when we came together that last night, we were able to go around the room, around the Zoom. I knew Mike would appreciate it. And we asked the question of everybody, where do you believe the Holy Spirit is leading us to plant this church and why? And everybody on the Zoom said Southwest.
And meant it.
Well, and also what was interesting or awesome, amazing, is that everybody in the room had a different why to go along with their decision. And one of the things that I said to the group after everybody had confirmed what they were feeling and thinking and felt the leading of the Holy Spirit, I told them that story about how at the assessment we had to have like a mock location, and I shouldn't say we, he did. I'm not a speaker, obviously. But, and that we did it, okay. We did it with Southwest as the community, because even at that time we had already felt a call in our life to Southwest. We didn't know if that would be church planting in Southwest, but just that we had a call there in some way. And so Nathan did his presentation on Southwest, the assessment ended. But what I really appreciated that the Lord provided for us was the advice that Mark Bawalda gave to us from Kendallville, Pine Hills, Kendallville, after the assessment, because he was there, and he said, even if you're feeling led to a location now, go through the TAP process, because what a sweet thing it is, and now I recognize that. Thank you, Mark, to have not just like confirmation in our hearts, but in 15 people's hearts toward one location. So, yeah, and that we know that it's not going to be an easy process. Church planting is not easy all the time, and that when you get down the road and you're in a tough spot, you can say, this wasn't manufactured, this wasn't like a misheard word from God. You're not doubting that because you're looking back and seeing this, like this group. So,
yeah, and so just to see the faithfulness of God in that, and you know, reluctantly handing over and giving Him control and trusting in Him, that, you know, we said, like, man, I could come in here and I could pitch Southwest every meeting, but if God doesn't show up in this process for every person, then it doesn't make a difference. And so, God, we trust that you're going to do that. And He did, one by one. And I think that, you know, even I had shared this with the group last week, and I think it really ties into Scott's question. When you talk about the unreached or the unchurched, for us, for Holly and I, why it's such a blessing that God has given us this opportunity in a place where He has developed relationships and He has begun to bear fruit, is that, you know, for the first time in Holly's experience through this pandemic, one of her co-teachers, one of her co-workers, his son has cancer. And at the end of a staff meeting in a public school corporation that was sued not too many years ago, and so they've stayed 10 feet away from anything religious, somebody said, hey, what if we spent some time praying? So for the first time ever in Holly's experience of teaching out there, there was an openness to pray. And I think just those people in that room, I don't know how many of those people are actually connected to a church. For me, and just looking at relationships that I have, what unchurched looks like to me is, you know, going back to, let's see, it would have been February, and getting a call from a parent of one of my wrestlers, that their son had attempted suicide. So that's a kid who's unchurched. That's a kid that, you know, not that and I have a relationship with him, and I've been working with him, so it's not like, oh, now we have a church in the area, now I can share Jesus with you. But now there's an opportunity to plug him into something else. I have a guy who I've coached with for every year, the grapevine back in the fall. He heard that we were planting a church. And somebody from Crossview said that we were planting at Southwest, even though that wasn't even on the table at the time. And so his question and so he asked, you know, does that, I guess he didn't think I was necessarily going with it, that my church was doing it, but it didn't necessarily involve me. And so he said, does that mean that you get to, like, be the pastor? And so this is a guy that, because he knows me, because of the relationship that we've had in the wrestling room for 7 years, and just got to see Nathan as a normal wrestling coach. Now he has an openness and a receptivity, and I can invite him to a church in his community and say, I'm going to be there when you get there. So that, for us, is the confirmation and the opportunity that we see present in the community. And so we're grateful that God is doing this where we currently are, because we've seen His hand working for many years now, and we're excited to see how He's going to continue to do that as we begin and take the next step in church planting.
Okay, we're going to do something really weird right now. I'm gonna ask if the TAP team, if you guys would go up to the conference room and you would give us just a few minutes together to talk to the Crossview leaders and our panel. We're going to talk about you and the work that you did. So if you listen real close to the register, you can probably hear everything that we say.
Telling in advance. We're telling you, we're gonna talk about you.
And we'll come back up and get you here in just a few minutes, okay? Cool. So, panel, still there? All right. So here's the reality of the situation, all right? The reality of the situation is Crossview is the sending church. And your elders are the ones, you are the guys that literally, you make the ultimate decision. This whole presentation, this whole process was to give you the information and the experience to say, okay, are we ready to do this? And so what I want to ask our panel, this one, I want to ask our panel, so from your perspective, guys, after hearing this presentation tonight, is there any reason why you would not affirm the team's decision? Yes, no, maybe? Thoughts, comments? I'm looking over here because I'm looking at the screen here, guys. So, yeah.
I want to say something.
Say something.
I just think it's really cool, and I mean, you can pass this on to the team. I actually do need to hop off, but just their willingness to press into the uncertainty of the times actually gave them an advantage because, like, I think people are more open to interacting right now since we don't have a lot going on. And so I just think it's really cool that everybody on the team, that they decided to go through with it and all of that. And also, this is like a testament to Nathan and Holly's leadership because this TAP team being such like a preview to what's to come and how he will lead teams and how they, just starting things out in prayer and being spirit-led and offering up, surrendering what they are wanting even from the beginning, and that they really, that reflected with their team as well. So I just wanted to affirm that for sure. And I will say that directly to Nathan and Holly as well later. But I affirm their conclusions.
Yeah. Anybody else? Panel, just to hear from you and then hear from leadership here.
I was pleasantly a little bit surprised, well, in the research phase as they talked a little bit about new people, connecting with some who had experiences in existing churches, and then they covered those bases. Sounds like they covered them well. Time will tell. In their own minds, if they feel like they covered it well enough and have that confidence to move forward. It's church. These kinds of decisions, I'm always reminded, you kind of have to, live with your own results.
Right.
This is something schools, it's home, and so, I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what happens next.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
And say this, I think the process, I think they really took the process seriously, and I appreciated that. I really, from what Brianna said, I noticed it right away, just their own sense of brokenness, or the sense of how many of those people in the room there said that transformational things happen in their own hearts through this, which is really significant. I think it's part of the genius of that process. I was curious if we had had more time, I might have even asked them how many of them went into this saying they intended from the beginning to be part of the church plant itself, and how many might say that now, if some of them may have come along. Maybe they all were from the beginning, but I just, you can see something really significant happening within them. And I think that, this is always true, and they mentioned it, but it sounds to me like that particular area, and I'm not familiar with it at all, but when they talked about how significant it is that the people who are at the core of this are people who've got relational capital in that area, they've lived there, I think that's really, it sounds like it's really a significant factor.
I agree.
The fact that those guys have lived there for 6 years, maybe even more than I would normally think it, that I feels like that's a really significant thing that they either discovered or had affirmed through this process. So I agree with Scott. I would say there's nothing in me that would say no to this. I do think obviously they got challenges ahead, but I think that was a really significant discovery and affirmation.
Yeah, agreed. Mark, anything to add?
I appreciate the sense of investment. I can tell this is it's been a personal process for them, and I think, we talk in the church planner assessments, the one that I always love talking about it is grit, because it's such a very specific concept that we don't mention very often, but just having, gone through what we've gone through at Kendallville, like that's an intangible, and I think this probably either helped them develop that through these really unique circumstances, not to shut it down and wait 2, 3, 6 months, but to say, okay, how do we figure this out on the fly and not waste all this time? So I sense a lot of emotional, personal, spiritual investment in the process. They're invested in the decision they're making, and I think the amount of hard work they had to do that they certainly weren't prepared to do will pay off in big ways going forward. Yeah. So, and then long way to say, no, I don't have any reason to not affirm the direction they're going.
So, and I don't want to say this for the sake of time, but I don't want to prolong this if not necessary. And obviously with the elders here, you guys, you're hearing from our panel. I want you to hear from me. I have coached Nathan through this from day one to right up to now. And from my perspective, and I heard the behind the scenes stories and everything. And it really was a situation for him where it's like, hey, this is really where we want to go. But every week we talk about how vitally important it was that the team, that they see this without you coming to the table and saying, trying to manipulate this. And I think we heard that tonight. I think we heard that loud and clear, but it just became very, very evident. We Nathan and I both, it's just like, and he goes like, do we even need to go on? And I said, yes. Yes, we do. This is vitally important for the reasons that Holly mentioned. So my question really comes back to the elders now. Here's what we're saying as a panel, and this is what I'm saying as a church planting coach. Man, I fully recommend their confirmation and their decision. I really believe they chose the right place, and I think this is going to be a vibrant church plant, especially with all who is involved in the TAP team's decision. So obviously, Pine Hills having City Church. I really believe
like this is incredible.
These guys were troopers, man,
Yeah.
you know, as you saw, so,
It's coming.
Yeah.
It will come.
Yeah.
And look back and say, no, this is why God did.
Dismiss the importance of this next moment. I mean, this team and commission them for the work. Let me see here.
Stop laughing at me because you're making me smile.
Yeah, what a great team.
Half our staff's on it.
Yeah. Excellent. And so, here's kind of what we'll do is, whenever they come back in, obviously we want to be brief here, just give them their
On all charges.
opportunity to make some comments about your presentation here. So panel, take it away. What would you like to say to these guys?
Speak to you individually, so that was communicated tonight. About how you have synthesized for it. Looking forward to seeing what the Lord does in an area that seems now, for many of the things that you've pointed out, it's very interesting time connected, and so, you know.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. That I just so appreciated is that you guys did not just approach this as like a scientific matter. You threw your hearts into this, and I think it was it Josh and Julie right at the beginning? This was not just an exercise in trying to make a decision. This was something where you brought your gift to the kingdom. It's I wish I had this group. When I would have started, I would have loved to have you guys be part of it, form you and shape you and break your hearts through this. And I'll just say this too, Nathan and Holly.
Yeah, and done a better job. And we keep saying, Tom loves this word unprecedented, and nobody said. And you tackled everything that came at you from every angle, and you know, we worked together, and very proud that you did not manipulate this in any way. I heard that tonight, and a place in their heart. They got a place picked out. Just the necessity of going through this. You've got this team of people now that when you're ready, rise to the surface, you're going to have freak out moments like never before. You have been to Nathan, to Holly, to us in the FEC, to Crossview, to thank you for the time, and as Tom said, the heart. Well done, seriously. God bless you. So, with that said, our panel to the elders of Crossview tonight, and the decision is theirs. And so